breakout session is being intentional about equity and inclusion. My name is Sarah Goldammer. I'm here with Molly Cook. We're from the Southern Illinois Professional Development Center and the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. And we're going to be your moderators today, supporting our presenter, who we'll introduce you to in just a minute. So a couple of reminders before we get started. We'll ask all participants on this session to have their audio on mute. We also ask that you not unmute yourselves unless prompted to participate in a potential engagement activity by the presenter. If you have questions as the session proceeds, please post your questions in the Q&A or chat boxes, and we will address them during our live Q&A portion of this session. If you feel comfortable, we encourage all participants to participate and engage with our presenter by having your video turned on, but please note that this session is being recorded and your video will potentially be on the recorded session. The presentation and corresponding materials are located on the Illinois Workforce Academy website under the 2021 WIOA Summit for your convenience. And this session recording will also be located there at the same webpage within 2 weeks of the summit. And I did put that in the chat. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar will be offering closed captioning. We will also be joined by a sign language interpreter today, and you see her here. If you have an attendee that requires, if there is an attendee that requires the use of sign language interpreter, please pin on the room. And we've also tried to spotlight, so hopefully Lizzie is there for you. Please make sure that you are in side-by-side full screen gallery view to fully access the interpreter's video. And lastly, as a reminder, because this is the world we live in now, if you have faulty internet connection or prefer to call in, you can do so by calling into the webinar or by using your phone number posted in the chat. We'll put that in just a minute. And with that, let's get started with our presenter, Dr. Lisa M. Bly-Jones.
Well, thank you for the introduction. And thank you all at SIU for all of the hard work that went into the WIOA Summit. I certainly can appreciate everything that went into pulling this off. So good afternoon and welcome to Being Intentional About Equity and Inclusion. I am Dr. Lisa Bly-Jones, Board Executive Director of Local Workforce Area 3 in Rockford, Illinois, serving Boone, Stevenson, and Winnebago. And I like to say I'm fortunate and get the experience of very diverse counties, with Boone being more suburban, Stevenson being a bit more rural, and the city of Rockford, which is part of Winnebago, making it the metropolitan area. So that gives you some perspective in terms of our local workforce area. Today's goal is meant to raise awareness and inspire action. We're living in a time where there are lots of conversations about equity and lots of conversations about changing systems and being more inclusive. In order to do that, it's my hope that you will be moved by something I say or something you hear from others that inspires you to become more intentional about equity and inclusion. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Molly, one back. I missed. Thank you. No, that one. Thanks. So I have, and I do want to use this word, I have had the privilege of spending most of my life around diverse groups of people. And I really do consider that a privilege because it has afforded me to learn a lot about different cultures and different people. And because I'm naturally curious and tend to ask very thoughtful and respectful questions, I have often been afforded the opportunity to facilitate discussions around very sensitive topics related to race and gender. As early as the 90s, I can recall being involved in conversations about diversity and inclusion, and some of those conversations were a bit uncomfortable. With each conversation, I bring my lived experiences as a Black woman who is a mom, a wife, a sister, and a daughter of Black men. I also happen to have been the only girl when I was growing up around lots of male cousins and uncles. So I've also been around guys and been the only girl for a lot of time in my life. And so it may not catch you by surprise that when I was choosing a dissertation topic, it happened to examine the glass ceiling effect on women leaders. And so my experiences dealing with race and gender, they're somewhat broad. So now that you've learned a little bit about me, it's time for me to hear from you. And I know we did an introductory, next slide. But we also, one of the things I think about in this day of everything being virtual is that if we were actually attending a conference, what I love most is the learning, but I also love the fact that you get to meet people who are doing similar work so you can learn more. So if we were attending in person, we would be able to see one another and find out who else is attending. We would also be able to make connections with our peers and colleagues. And so we're going to work the chat. And what we're going to do is I am going to ask you why this workshop. And so whether it is related to just basic interests, or if there is work that you're doing in your local workforce area around equity, or whatever the reason, please feel free to put it in the chat. The other thing I would ask is, as we move throughout the session today, I want to invite some excitement around using the reaction buttons. So if something lands with you one way or the other, please feel free to communicate that by using the reaction buttons. It's also, I really will appreciate it because it'll remind me that you're out there, and it lets me know that you're engaged in the conversation. So thank you for that. And then we'll just give a few minutes for you to put in the chat, why this workshop?
Okay, there's some questions, there's some answers coming in. Do you want me to go ahead and as people are start reading some of them?
Sure, that would be great.
We should be doing more work around equity and inclusion. Very interested and invested personally as well. And another person similar said work and personal. What's her reasons and interest? Let's keep going down. Necessity of the topic and Lisa as the presenter. So there you go. Pick this workshop because it was of interest.
The check is in the mail.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I probably have the least conscious knowledge about this topic. So let's see.
And so to that point, I would also like to offer this up just in case there is a question or something that you may not want to publicly ask. If there's a way to send it to me privately, I would welcome that as well, just so that I don't want someone to have a burning question and not have the opportunity to ask it. And then you'll have my email at the end as well, but I just want to put that out there as an option as well.
Absolutely. And to that point, you should be able, you as attendees can choose everyone, or you can choose Dr. Lisa Bly-Jones as an option if you want to send something just to her, and then we can save the chat. Continuing on, there's a lot of responses. We have a very engaged group here.
Yay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's nice,
exciting.
Especially right after lunch. That's very good news. I became an anti-racist organizer in 1985 in the University of Illinois, Chicago. Someone shared, somebody said they were just curious. I want to better support inclusion efforts for all.
Great.
Basic interests. We're developing the statistical adjustment model for WIOA performance negotiations and trying to measure the effects of serving those with barriers to employment.
Okay.
I want to
continue.
Yeah, I want to.
Yeah.
Do you want me to? There's like 50 more, so we might.
Well, let's hold on to some of them, and that is good to know. And we certainly will keep those and capture those. So we can know more, especially with the work that we're doing with the Equity Task Force. So that's great. So I'm gonna move forward with the next slide, Molly, please. And so So here are the 3 areas that we're going to cover in our time together. Implicit biases, the field of workforce development, and then we're going to talk about what it means to actually be more intentional. And I love the Maya Angelou quote. And recently, I actually heard the police chief from the community I once lived in and raised my children in. So it was affirming to hear him say, he used the phrase kind of differently, and it resonated with me as well. And he said, when we know better, we can be better. And so I just love that too, because it is all about being better. Next slide, please. So what exactly is implicit bias? And the magician earlier, he talked briefly about it and kind of pointed to it. And it really is about a lens that's a product of the architecture of our brain. And then it's also paired with the disparities in our society. And biases can lead to racial disparities in everything from preschool suspensions to corporate leadership. And then unfortunately, the disparities then bolster our biases. So when we talk about confronting implicit bias, it really requires us to look in the mirror. And then the change requires a kind of open-minded attention that is well within our reach. Are we all vulnerable to bias? Absolutely. Is acting on bias inevitable? Yes, I would say so. We do a lot of snap judgments and decisions. And so it is that taking a step back to be more thoughtful that allows us to think about our biases in a different way and approach it differently. Next slide, please. So when we talk about biases, just what exactly do we mean? And how many biases are there? There are tons, which I am sure you are probably aware of. And these are just a few that are here. Sometimes it's hard to know whether we have acted on a bias or been a target of it. And so one of the things I'm going to ask you to do right now, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes with me for a minute. Yeah, I'm closed. And so I want you to think about a time when you yourself were worried that you acted on a bias. And if you don't think you acted on a bias, think about a time when you may have felt targeted by a bias. Give some thought to what may have made you feel this way. And then how did you respond to the situation? For most of us, and I'll say especially people of color, we can probably think of a ton of them. But as you can see, there are so many more. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to take the Harvard Implicit Association test, where there's a wide range of bias tests. And so I'm always fascinated. I've taken a couple, and they have the test that they have, it's a long list of them, but they have race, they have religion, disability, sexuality, weapons, even skin tone, even presidential popularity, this age, weight. So there are a number of different biases that show up, whether or not we are mindful of it or not. I chose the gender career test, and as shocking as it may be, I had a slight association for male with career and female with family-based on the questions asked about my beliefs, attitudes, and opinions. And it's really quite fascinating because I want to believe I was more evolved in that. But when you think about your beliefs and your attitudes and opinions, it goes back to how that shows up. So that would be something I would be paying close attention to. Next slide, please. So how do we sort biases in our mind? It's a fundamental tool that our brain is wired to use. We label the beliefs we have about social groups, and as I said earlier, it can happen in a matter of milliseconds, no matter what kind of person we wish to be in the world. So in the United States, Blacks are so strongly associated with threats and aggression, and that's a stereotypical association. And then something else that contributes to association tends to be repetitive pairing, and that leads to association. So for example, when you talk about stereotypical association and you talk about repetitive pairing, if you constantly hear criminal activity and Black male, it's a gender race pairing. So then when you have that association in your mind, when you encounter someone, you may respond or react with that bias without even taking a step to realize that. And so it's impossible to be exposed to this kind of categorical pairing and not have it affect how we think, feel, or behave. And that applies to all of us. So could it alter someone's way of seeing the world? Absolutely, it does. There are studies that show Blacks, Latinx, and Asians are subject to stereotypes that could resonate unfavorably with employers or recruiters. And so oftentimes many take pains to scrub their resumes or references that could draw attention to their race in ways that may trigger damaging stereotypes in the process of going after a job. Next slide, please. So I picked these 3 examples as to hear a little bit about some triggered events that went public. And so Nextdoor is an online social networking platform that serves as sort of a giant chat room for individual neighborhoods. And the mission statement conveyed a high-minded goal to provide a trusted platform where neighbors work together to build stronger, safer, happier communities. The crime and safety category became a bit of a problem. And so there were too many posts with racist overtones, messages that label Blacks and Latinx as being suspicious for walking down a street, sitting in a car, talking on a cell phone, or knocking on a door. So instead of bringing neighbors together, the platform actually exposed raw racial dynamics that generated hurt feelings, sparked hostilities, and fueled fierce online arguments. And so most people weren't consciously trying to racial profile. They just knew they had seen something that made them uncomfortable. And it compelled them, for safety's sake, to share it. So in this heightened state, they put out a message and then they think they were doing good by doing that. Well, eventually the posting process was changed to require users to hone in on behavior instead of the person. And so it pushed them past this whole idea that if you see something, say something. They arrived at a place of actually asking more pointed questions like, what is the person doing that concerns you? And how does it relate to a possible crime? So it was something that, I won't say it was minor, but it was something that had to have attention called to it to make adjustments to the platform. And then most of us are aware of the Starbucks incident, as it's referred to, where 2 young Black men waiting to meet a business acquaintance in a Starbucks, handcuffed and arrested for trying to use the restroom without buying anything first. And then it was the white businessman who rose to their defense and the Black police chief who said they deserved. And so they went through this whole thing. And what Starbucks decided to do as a business was to hold a nationwide training on implicit bias for its 175 employees. And so they talked about the price of the actual act to address the implicit bias in training. So it was 8,000 company stores that were shut for the 4-hour session, which included a series of short films featuring Black people of all ages talking about how discrimination in public places actually made them feel. And so there's a dollar amount they put to that in terms of the lost revenue. But I also think it probably was an awakening in terms of actually hearing how people felt when they had those experiences. The last example is the Airbnb example, providing a platform for sharing homes with distant travelers. Now, they tended to take more of a legalistic approach. So in 2016, when Blacks took to Twitter, Facebook, and other social medias to share their stories, they realized they had lots of similar experiences. When they would try to book a place, they were told by the owner it wasn't available. And then they would have white friends try to book the same place for the same time period, and it was suddenly available. And they found that there were racial disparities present in every city with every type of property and every category of host, whether it was a room or a full home. And so they chose a civil rights attorney to assist them, and she took the legal route and asked the question, how much control should people have in deciding who comes into their home once they have publicly advertised it to make money? They decided to develop a community commitment pact. And that pact states that I agree to treat everyone in the community, in the Airbnb community, regardless of their race, religion, national origin, ethnicity, disability, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, or age, with respect and without judgment or bias. And users, so discrimination prevents hosts, guests, and their families from feeling included and welcomed, and we have no tolerance for it. So users who were not willing to sign the commitment, it was said that they could not use the platform anymore. And so here is, in all of these examples, it is all about becoming more intentional and how organizations were put in a place or a position to have to take time to step back and think about what is the intent? What is it we're working to do with our service, our business, and what is the intent of our actions? And so then the next decision is, what impact do we want to have on people? And I think those are two important questions we can ask ourselves about our intent and our impact on people as well. Next slide, please. So here's where I'm going to need some more help with the chat. Because I think this brings us to another place as we think about implicit biases and we think about how it's part of the brain architecture and part of what goes into images and what we're shown and all of that goes into our split-second decision making. How do we know when we are being insensitive or unfair? And how much of who we are and how we feel is dictated by things outside of our awareness or control? And then the most emphasis I would like to place is on the last two, where it is all about how often are we really the tolerant, fair-minded person we want to be? And how can we learn to check ourselves and mute the negative impact that biases can have? So feel free to put your feedback, your thoughts, your comments in the chat. And then I am going to ask for some assistance with the chat.
Absolutely. So we have one comment that's already in. I asked what the person thought about my actions and or words. I asked people who were present. And someone else said that the key is constantly checking oneself. And in my experience, the more research I do on implicit biases, the more I can recognize them in my own snap judgments and actions.
So what's interesting to me about the point that was made about asking the person and asking others, there are so many dynamics that may go into when you ask someone if that made them feel uncomfortable or how the comment landed or how they took it. Sometimes it may be uncomfortable if the person is the only person that's different in the conversation, whether that is race or gender or any other of the characteristics that may be different from the majority in the conversation. So sometimes that can be awkward, but I would definitely say having more one-on-one sensitive conversations. And the other point I'll make, in some instances, if there is the positions are roles of superior or peers or subordinates, people don't like that word, but then I would just caution to be extra sensitive about the conversation and the context of the conversation.
A few more comments have come in.
Okay.
Body language, facial expressions. Typically, people tell me when I've been insensitive. It is amazing how different experiences and perspectives change the lens in which we view the world. I have learned through mistakes. And another one, we are often nowhere near the fair-minded person we perceive ourselves to be. But we can always feel okay when how we operate, when we make sure we don't get defensive, when others let us know we may have made them feel a given way, for better or worse. And first, we have to be aware of what can be perceived as insensitive or unfair. We have to be very intentional to examine our thoughts and behaviors and turn that into habit in order to best check our biases. I usually try to gauge my bias when I feel inconvenienced by my need for support. Is my sentiment based on who is asking? And I'm almost always tolerant and fair-minded. People have a tendency to side with others regardless if they really feel to avoid rejection from peers. And I think a way to mute our negative impact is changing our perspective and viewing situations, behaviors, actions from the lens of others. It is also important to just listen. We are all quick to react and respond instead of taking time to sit back and listen. And
yeah, I've heard a couple of things that are striking. The notion of listening, I think, is really important. Something else I heard is creating a culture and an environment that allows for open dialogue about such a sensitive topic. And so I really want to lift that up and celebrate that there is an environment that creates that kind of place for open dialogue. Thank you. So we're gonna move forward and let's hold on to some of those additional comments. So cultural and procedural forces can sometimes reinforce biased behavior. Our brains, our minds are molded and remolded by our experiences and our environments. Our biases condition how we look at the world and the people within it. Fear can also be a driver of bias if your attitudes and experiences lead you to a fear-based response. Ultimately, we have the power to change our ways of thinking and to scrub away the residue of ancient demons in our thinking. I would sing this, but I'm not. I can hear Aretha Franklin saying respect. But research shows that what dictates whether things can escalate or not is based on respect. When we think about some of the encounters with police, the research shows that what dictates whether a routine stop escalates, it can be something as basic as the way the police officer talks to the driver they stop. Respect, politeness, friendliness, formality, and impartiality. So when the officer uses less respect at the beginning of the stop, the driver tends to express more negative emotions later in the stop. Research also has identified key elements that can improve school performance. And they rest on a basic principle that students need to feel individually valued and respected, connected to both the people and the process involved in their education. Those psychological factors can affect how and how much our children learn. So it takes more than interpersonal connection to break the bonds of institutional bias and promote the sort of equality that allows us all to thrive. There needs to be an acknowledgement of history that created the structural barriers to integration and equity. And whether we want to own it or not, our history actually does shape our view of the present. And so unconscious bias operates quietly, and so much so that social scientists actually have to prove that it exists in a lot of the research that we read. We have multiple cells that we carry around within us. And the question sometimes is which self dominates to guide our thoughts, feelings, and actions. In part, it's a function of situations we find ourselves in. Increasing diversity has been like this conventional remedy for implicit bias, that working together will surely counter the power of stereotypes and erase all of the outdated ways of thinking about one another. But diversity alone won't remedy that. There are more differences, so there's actually the potential for more discord. When privilege shifts and role changes and new voices emerge. So the actual what contributes to success is our willingness to tolerate the discomfort as we learn to communicate and get to know each other. That's what actually contributes to the success. Next slide, please. This graph is meant to show unemployment trends from 2009 to 2021. That's 12 years. So that's what the numbers, not the different days, it's actually the years. And when you look at the slides, you can see the different disparities that exist. But also this graph is an indicator of who needs services that are offered in American job centers across the state of Illinois. Historically, not only are Blacks less likely to be employed than whites, they tend to have worse jobs and earn less money. And there are many factors that contribute to those disparities. So if and when these individuals actually reach out for services, the question becomes, how thoughtful are we to ensure our practices are equitable and fair, to ensure comparable outcomes for all? There are numerous studies that have been conducted and found that both Blacks and Latinx are disadvantaged by bias in the job search, and I shared some of that earlier. And so the question, another question for us to consider is, how do we look at this data and get intentional about our approach and equitably serving everyone? Next slide, please. The unemployment rate for Black teens and young adults is also twice as high as it is for whites. And at a time when critical work habits and life skills are developed, Black teens in low-income neighborhoods where businesses, restaurants, and retail outlets are sparse, they have fewer options because they are competing with adults for entry-level jobs. The other contributing factors for the disparities are the applicant's social network, and in terms of who do you know to get a job, your educational level, your skills, and then in some instances, some jobs, they require experience. If you've never had a job, you probably don't have experience. And so every society has disadvantaged groups that are the targets of biases. And the awareness is not to suggest that, bias awareness is not to suggest that prejudice will be magically wiped out. That's not the case at all. It's meant to make us aware of how our minds work and those knee-jerk choices that are driven by stereotypes that cloud what we see and perceive. So thinking about these numbers as actual people and faces and needs to be met. The intent of bias training, it really is genuine and pure. And it's meant to make us all more mindful of how we interact with others as we move throughout the world. Addressing implicit biases, it is systemic work, especially when it involves changes in cultural practices and policies. And when we are forced to make quick decisions using subjective criteria, the potential for bias is great. And more importantly, it's likely to flare up when our decisions are left unmonitored and there are no checks and balances on spur of the moment decisions. So addressing biases is not a personal choice. It actually is a social agenda and a moral stance. Next slide, please. Yep. So let's talk briefly about the field of workforce, the field of workforce development. My colleague, Laura Gergley from WIOA, she shared an interesting article with me that was rather enlightening. And it's one in a series entitled Racism in Workforce Development, published by Claire Minson, a visiting scholar at the Atlanta Fed Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity. It provided the history of workforce development programs and the shift from a race neutrality approach to a race explicit approach, and back to a race neutral approach, which is where it stands now. And what that means is just that it focuses broadly on poverty. And what we know we've learned over the last year is that COVID-19 has laid bare what many already knew to be true. The economic systems and structures we have in place are not designed to support and sustain equity. So during this current recession, the highest rates of unemployment are concentrated among women, racial and ethnic groups, part-time workers, workers without a high school diploma, and workers who were last employed in industries that provide in-person services. The people who were already most at risk because of historical, systemic, and institutional barriers are even at greater risk in the moments of crisis and economic recession. So the plight of these systemically marginalized workers is compounded as the nation steers toward a recovery in which industries and occupations will be changed by new technology, new and remote ways of working, and increased automation. What does that mean? It's demanding all new skills. So that goes back to the visual about the individuals' faces that you see who will be coming into the American Job Centers. As essential as training programs will continue to be, they cannot alone overcome systemic obstacles to economic prosperity that have held back marginalized workers and communities. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Next slide, please. So here is how some questions we can ask ourselves to begin some of this work that's ahead of us. And this is, we always talk about the ecosystem when we talk about our collaboration. This is all about all of us thinking about this who are in the field of workforce development. How we talk about our work. Let's be mindful about the narratives that are perpetuated across the field. How do we do our work? Service delivery and program design. Does it blame the individual rather than the system? The policy framework we operate in? Do race neutral policies create the current context and widen the wealth gap? How we work with employers. Do we position employers as more sovereign over workers, making them more important than the individual? And how do we work with funders and philanthropy? Do we position funders as all powerful and all knowing, often reinforcing the existing power dynamics and this notion of superiority and inferiority and determining who has value and who doesn't? These are some bold questions to ask ourselves, but if we truly believe that our workforce ecosystem is one of collaboration, it's an ideal starting place. If the field and all of the stakeholders connected to it can agree to intentionally and regularly examine, address, and undo the inherent systemic issues embedded in the ecosystem, we can fundamentally shift the trajectory of millions of people's lives who are relying on us in this work. Next slide. So I have this thing I say all the time. I could not get out of bed every day if I did not believe that change is possible. I just couldn't. And I'm sure most of you feel the same. Next slide, please. So I am going to take a moment here to say I serve as one of the co-chairs of the WIOA Equity Task Force. And I have the pleasure of working with my colleague, who is also a practitioner in the field, Elba Arandasa, who is the executive director of the National Latino Education Institute. And I can tell you, as two women of color in leadership roles who work across the state and across the country in the field of workforce development, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. So that's my joke about farmers. But it is true. We've seen a thing or two. And so we're working extremely hard to get our arms around what we can do and the levers we can pull for systemic change. And it's not an easy journey. There was an action item for workforce development that referenced establishing equity goals. But before a system can establish equity goals, there needs to be a point of taking a deep dive into the data. And when we talk about diving into the data, we know that disaggregated data is where you find the nuances. This work isn't about the numbers served, it's about the outcomes of participants. What does the pipeline look like across gender, race, ethnicity, and age? What are we really measuring? Where are there leaks in the pipeline? With that, we're applying an equity lens as we examine policy, programs, and data. I actually really appreciate this workforce equity definition that came out of the Advancing Workforce Equity Project. And I think it really speaks to an ideal state. Next slide, please. So briefly, I just want to say, being intentional, our workforce board is leading the charge in the Rockford region. And what I really appreciate about workforce boards is that they're led by business people who offer insightful perspectives. And so my board chair, Frank Rotello, definitely keeps me on my toes with 7 active board committees. And the committee that focuses on data for us is our Performance and Accountability, our PAC committee. And we have on our staff a data guru, Mike Johnson, and him and our PAC chair, Bob Girl, who happens to be an engineer by trade, they are all about the data. And so when I tell you we look at it deeply, you can't even imagine how deeply we look at the data. But that data is what we use for messaging with our elected officials and regional employers when we talk about workforce issues we want to tackle in the Rockford region. And I think we have been really fortunate to elevate and amplify our conversations, especially about workforce across the podcast. I get to talk to my colleagues and other leaders across the country as we continue to dig in and do meaningful work in this space of workforce development. Next slide, please. So here are just some data sets that we look at to better understand our population. We want to understand their education status beyond what they have when they enter the system. We also want to understand what participants have when they leave and the role the workforce system plays in advancing their success. We look at the sectors that we invest most in our area. Number 1, healthcare, 2, transportation and warehousing, and 3, manufacturing. We look at the wages, and we further disaggregate data to examine wages based on race and gender. Our data proves that individuals who attend job training have higher wages than those who seek employment without training. And that's one of the reasons we strongly advocate for more training funds. And what I really value about analyzing the data is the deep group discussions that the data prompts. You know, those robust discussions where you look at all of the data and you ask the questions and you wonder why, and everybody has a thought or an opinion, those discussions. And after we discuss findings, we have a better understanding of what's working well and what can be improved upon. With data in hand and detailed discussions, we are better positioned to be intentional about the work ahead of us. Next slide, please. And so here is the Q&A. Trying to watch my time and give enough time. And so again, we're gonna fire up the chat, and there are your 3 questions. What have you learned in our short time together? What will you do differently? And please tell me what's giving you hope based on what you've heard, whether it was something I said or something you read in the chat. Please feel free to put your comments in the chat, and then I will toss it back over to hear some of what's in the chat. And if there is a burning question, please put that there as well.
All right, yes, they're coming in now. To not become defensive when told that your comment or suggestion was offensive, allow the person to explain their feelings. The Harvard implicit bias test, I looked it up and it's interesting. And then number 2, it says, not sure yet, tough question. And yeah, when another person says, I plan to take the Harvard implicit test. Change is possible. We need to have tolerance for discomfort. Non-judgmental from all aspects. The nieces, and for number 3, what gives you hope? The nieces and nephews give me hope. They are innocent and I miss that. Another is, I love the explanation of disaggregated data as not about the numbers served, but outcomes of participants. Yeah, I agree with that. I wrote that one down. The younger workers in my organization are much more advanced than my generational peers. I see a lot of hope in our youth. Another comment is, stop being so selfish as people. The conversations give me hope. When we know better, we do better. Thanks, Lisa. Terrific presentation. Another, when we know better, we can do better. And I look forward to disaggregating data by the categories you described in the last slide. Thank you for this informative presentation. And I happen to know that that person has a lot of influence over data, so you have definitely influenced the right person there. Looking forward to seeing that as well. I'm learning about hope, which sometimes I forget exists. I will continue as I am and hope others realize we must live and work with diversity. We all have biases, and acknowledging our biases is key. Another wonderful presentation. And this one is number 1. I learned to leave my upbringing, feelings, thoughts at the door and be more of an empathetic listener. And that also applies to number 2. And number 3, recent current event happenings gives me hope that there will be change in the future. I realize we won't see it happening overnight, but we will need to do our parts in igniting change. I have learned that everyone has different biases. I agree change is possible if we all work together and are not defensive when corrected by someone. That has to go both ways, meaning that if you give criticism, you have to take it from the person and not the stereotype. See them for who they are. Another, thanks for the presentation. Knowledge is power. We must all continue to educate ourselves in our networks. And I will share the training I received with my organization. And there's a question about receiving a copy of these slides. And yes, those are on the WIOA website. You can find the slides to this presentation. And more thanks to you for sharing. Respect for each other goes a long way. We find that participants tend to gravitate to training in fields they're familiar with. However, sometimes familiarity can lead to concentrations of certain groups in certain industries. For example, women in healthcare. How to help participants explore other career pathways while still respecting customer choice. So that's a question for you. If you, how do we help participants?
Can you read that again? I was,
sure.
I'm sorry. I was
there was a lot of information. So let me give you that one again. So oftentimes, participants tend to gravitate to training in fields they're familiar with. And so how do we help participants explore other career pathways while still respecting customer choice?
Yeah. So here is what I'll say about that. I think another point I would make about our work, I think we have an opportunity to do much more in the area of career awareness and exploration. I think we think about it a lot of times in terms of young people, but I often think we should think about it as it relates to adults as well. People don't know what they don't know. So if you don't know a particular position even exists on a pathway, how would you be aware of it to choose the training? So that means there's an opportunity for career planners or case managers to become more informed about different options. And then that way, if we're going to lean to informed customer choice, then we are informing them with more choices. So that's what I would say about that.
All right, thank you. Then another comment, learned a lot from hearing the perspectives of others. And number two, it's important to decenter yourself from the conversation, which that this person hopes to improve upon. And three, we have another that youth gives so much hope. That seems to be a common theme. Also those who aren't youth, who have the openness to listen and have the uncomfortable conversations. So, there is a link in the chat for a copy of the slides, a direct link. So there you go, to make that as accessible as possible for you.
So here's something I'm going to say in the break too. I said this, but it was mixed in the slide, but I think it's worth echoing. We're still in the people business, even though we do a lot of systemic work. And so when we think about people and we think about providing them with options, I think we don't want to put the onus on them to know what they want when they come in. I think that's where we really can level up our expertise in the field of workforce development so that we're well informed about options to present. Because I heard that comment about customer choice. And I think the word that I would add on there is informed customer choice. And so who needs to be informed? Us as the professionals in the field or the customer? So I would lean more towards us being more informed and being able to offer up more options for customers to make an informed choice. I just thought that was worth echoing again.
Yes, and there was a, yes, thank you. That's a great point. And Elba says that it's great input here, some more to consider for our task force.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask to put the last slide up because I want to be mindful that we are running out of time. And there is my contact information. And so I'll also say, this is a journey, not a destination. And journeys are all about experiences. And it's my hope that today's session has provided you with something memorable as you continue on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's tons of thanks coming into the chat. So we'll get all of those comments to you. Just to let all of our participants know, the next session is at 3 o'clock. That was done purposefully so that you'll have a little bit of time to go check that email, walk the dog, whatever you need to do to be ready for the 3 o'clock session. But we will see you again at 3 o'clock. So we thank you very much for sharing with us, Dr. Bly-Jones, and we look forward to the conversations to come.
Thank you.